Hello everyone and welcome to the May NMSS Reassembly Tournament. This time we made some slight rules adjustments. Of note, the Sentinel ships are allowed to have 6 melee spikes now instead of 5, and some more generators for Tinkeril ships are available. Additionally, the asteroid movers for the Terran faction are banned from the tournament completely, meaning that we should be seeing a lot smaller ships in general, especially out of the Terrans. On top of that, I'd like to welcome 7 new competitors to the NMSS tournament. Some of them are recognizable names from other tournaments, but this is their first time in NMSS, so they get to join in on the early participant pool, or the new participant pool, rather. Alright, I do need to make one adjustment. All ships need to have guns, and Worthless does not, so Worthless doesn't get to play. Other than that, it's the 35,000 unit arena, 16,000 budget, max of 32 ships, and a maximum ship size of 8,000 P per ship. So let's get the tournament going. Up first we have GraffixJoka's fleet up against SaDe wangbadan. GraffixJoka has a homogeneous fleet. You can see plenty of missiles, some burst lasers, and everything protected by shields. Pretty decent layout for kiting. It looks like some of his ships did manage to spawn on top of each other. SaDe wangbadan is instead using some very fragile but heavily shielded ships. This one has a ton of missiles, and this one a ton of mortars. So we shall see how these go. SaDe wangbadan seems to be part of a gaming clan of some kind as well. There was another submission named SaDe. He's one of our Chinese competitors, and there was another submission that also used the SaDe tag, but the other submission, I believe, there was something wrong with it, and I had to reject the fleet, unfortunately, and I never got a reply back from the author. But here's hoping he represents well. And because I was curious at the time of their submissions, I did find out for you that SaDe actually means shaman in Mandarin. So enjoy that. But we're off to a pretty strong start for SaDe wangbadan, having taken out 5 of GraffixJoka's ships pretty quickly. You can see that the large ships out of SaDe wangbadan are very fast. They have no hull or chassis to speak of, so they do maneuver very quickly, and the abundance of shields will make them very resistant to harassment. These missiles out of GraffixJoka are going to have a very hard time. You can see he's managed to score 2,000 points, and he destroyed a quarter of the missile ship from wangbadan, but hasn't been able to make a whole lot of progress since then. And with his numbers dwindling, looks like round 1 is going to go in favor of 005. A very confident first round, and I wouldn't be too terribly surprised if the second went very similarly. As I like to say, mortars are kind of in a weird spot. They have this breaking point where any number of mortars below a certain threshold generally doesn't justify their expense, but any number of mortars above that threshold will utterly shatter anything that they hit. In this case, because GraffixJoka is only using the light shield to represent the bulk of his defense, the breaking point with mortars is somewhere in the market of about 12 or 14. If you do that, then you'll immediately destroy the shields and half of the ship at the very least, probably taking out the generator and the core from any direction. And you can see, looking at the mortar ship out of 005, that he is certainly using enough to get the job done, and 005 takes round 1. So moving in round 2, we have Broken Arrow Fleet by Kamikaze Dalek. I believe Kamikaze Dalek said this is his first tournament ever. I'm not entirely sure. But we can see he's using some proton beams up on the front, some antimatter cannons, I'm seeing some railguns, so these ships should be fighting at pretty long range. This guy is just a bunch of mine layers and some thrusters intended to be chased, it seems. We've got a pretty rank-and-file looking skirmisher type with the It's got autocannons, some of the light plasma cannons, the blast pulsar, and yeah. So Splinter is bringing up a good point. I don't speak any. The only languages I speak are English and a bit of French and German. So if it's not one of those three languages, chances are I'm mispronouncing it. And if I am, I apologize. I know, especially in Chinese, different pronunciations can dramatically affect the meanings of the word. And so if I am pronouncing it wrong, I'm sorry, please forgive me. But that said, if you do see this and I am pronouncing it wrong, let me know in the comments and I will try to correct it in the future. But let's get this one going. I feel like this one's going to go a bit more in favor of GraffixJoka. The mine ship, you can already see, has been cut to shreds. The missiles are, as long as GraffixJoka's fleet can keep enough of its ships alive, the missiles will systematically cut through all of these shields with very little problem. Kamikaze Dalek doesn't have nearly enough point defense to deal with the sheer onslaught of all these missiles. The blast pulsar ship will last a little longer, as we saw last tournament. Splinter showed us that the blast pulsar, or well, not last tournament, I don't think, but Splinter has showed us that the blast pulsars can make very effective point defense, but a very solid round one in favor of GraffixJoka. Another interesting thing I'd like to point out, the RogueDrones are a gaming community, clan, organization, team, whatever you want to call it. They used to participate in a lot of the NMSS tournaments, but we haven't seen them for a while. However, they decided to show up again in force this month. I think there's something like 4 or 5 participants from RogueDrones, which I always appreciate seeing, and I'm glad to have them back. But that said, seems GraffixJoka is going to take his second match very confidently. Up next we have Keniteraa by LightningJC. LightningJC does this sort of construction. It's very hard to describe. I believe some of the other tournament hosts use a very organic nature to the ships. It kind of looks like he started with a ship and then just continued to add to it until it did what he wanted it to do, which kind of makes a lot of sense. It leads to a very scavenger looking aesthetic that I'm pretty fond of. That said, LightningJC is a frequent participant in some of the other tournaments that you'll see, but this is his first time in the gauntlet, and so he gets into the first time submission pool. You can see a few station shields on those big guys. We'll see how they hold up. The station shields might hold up a little better, but you can see one of the big guys already taking a ton of damage. The initial onslaught from the missile ships out of GraffixJoka's fleet is really about the worst it could be. You really don't want your potentially fragile ships like the station shields to take that initial onslaught, because that's, if any time they're going to go down, that's the time. But after the initial onslaught, they're skirmishing a bit better, but I think GraffixJoka's fleet is going to end up with the advantage in this. As the number of ships beginning to dwindle for LightningJC. The next round might go a bit better, but we shall see. A fleet of missile ships is generally a very strong early type of design. We see them from time to time in the tournaments, and they generally do rather well. But if you're ever looking to make some good progress early on, then I can very much recommend a very similar style to what GraffixJoka is doing. The ships are very simple, they're lightweight, they've got a lot of missiles. The burst lasers for point defense in particular are noteworthy because they are very good at taking out incoming missiles. Some of the point defense either doesn't track that well, or like the flak cannon is pretty decent against groups of incoming projectiles, but not so great against an individual projectile. For example, if there is a single torpedo heading towards you, the flat cannon might not be able to destroy it, whereas a burst laser might. Because it's a beam weapon, the burst lasers are much more precise, and they're a longer range than most of the other weapons that you can effectively use as point defense, which helps encourage your ships to stay a bit further back. So for kiting fleets especially, the burst laser is a very good choice for point defense. And I'm not sure how influential that is in particular in this fight, but the burst lasers do seem to be working out pretty well. You can see the large ships out of LightningJC's fleet are launching a pretty good pile of drones, which is giving the burst lasers something to shoot at. You can also see that they're spending a good bit of time actually firing at the other ships. But here you'll see the initial volley will play havoc with that station shield, and after the station shield goes down, unfortunately Lightning ships don't seem to be lasting too long. But another round for GraffixJoka. Doing very well so far. Up next we have Command Execute with a bad fleet. Command Execute, it's worth noting, this isn't just his first participation in an NMSS tournament, but his first tournament participation ever. So here's hoping he does well. His fleet is kind of spinnery, but you can see these guys are big blocks of armor, which I think will serve them pretty well. You've got plenty of burst lasers on this guy, but it looks like he's sideways. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but the core is placed on an angle rather than what would appear to be forward. We've got plenty of torpedoes coming out of these, which you will have no... we've seen a lot of torpedoes in the last tournaments. They're very effective. Got your drone launchers on a kiter, and more duplicates. Of note, one thing that Command Execute did that's very important, you'll notice that his torpedoes aren't all on the same angle. This is kind of going to give them a spread fire arc when they're shooting at the enemy, and that's going to serve him pretty well, especially against the more mobile targets. You can see the missile or the torpedoes kind of fan out. He's not using quite as many as we've seen of some of the other participants, and it does appear that GraffixJoka is going to be largely protected by the missiles themselves, because I haven't mentioned it yet this tournament, but whenever a missile collides with any physics object, be it a missile, a drone, or anything like that, the missile will detonate immediately, which means that the cloud of missiles coming out of GraffixJoka's ships are going to do a very good job of stopping those torpedoes. You could still get torpedoes through, but you would have to use considerably more than Command Execute has brought to the field. You can also see he's using some mortars on these. Is that 16 mortars on each of those big guys? That is going to play havoc against any slower, more heavily armored targets if he does manage to encounter them. GraffixJoka making a very strong showing. I think he was leaning on his experienced teammates a bit in his designs. He's certainly shown himself to be a cut above average. And a very strong round one, again going in favor of GraffixJoka. But you can see there the fragility of GraffixJoka's ships. If they do get caught out or misbehave at all, they pretty much instantly vaporize. You can also see that Command Execute, another thing I didn't notice until just now, he's using the manipulators on these things, which will help them against slower moving projectiles a bit more, I think. Something like errant torpedo spam rather than, or well, a few errant torpedoes, not necessarily spamming them. But the manipulators can slow down incoming missiles or ships that get too close, which is going to help those mortars hit slow targets, and it'll help deal with incoming torpedoes. But I don't know that he has anything else as point defense on these things, which means the armored ships are going to get pretty consistently whittled down by all of the incoming missile fire. And this is another problem we see every once in a while. You can see the shield is dead, but the hull is intact. And that's a problem that has to do with I know it works with burst lasers, and I think it affects all beam weapons. If a beam weapon destroys a shield, it can also destroy the shield generator, which I feel like isn't supposed to be how it works, but that is the environment we have to work with. And yeah, the big ships out of Command Execute do look a bit like a microchip. I almost want to say that that's not coincidental either, given the name. But it's looking as though this round is going to go in favor of GraffixJoka as well. Well done, GraffixJoka. That said, Command Execute is not out of it yet. He, like I said, all it takes is a second or two of one of his ships making interesting choices, and Command Execute's ships, especially those large ones, will have no problem cleaving through them, with Command Execute actually taking a very small but point lead for a moment. Although I think the time has come. With one of the large spinners down, I don't know that Command Execute's going to have the staying power or the offense to really get that lead back. Holding up a lot better than the previous run, though, I think. And GraffixJoka takes it. So up next we have Katusha Fleet, Electric Boogaloo by Drills007. For those not familiar, Electric Boogaloo is an internet in-joke having to do with sequels. This was a secondary submission, and he tagged it with Electric Boogaloo on the second submission. You know, because reasons. So let's see what we have here. These are plasma projectors, which are solid Terran weapons, at least mathematically, but I've never been able to get them to work terribly well. They have pretty good range, pretty good rate of fire, good velocity, but they don't... I've never been able to get them to be as good as I think they should be. So here's hoping Drills does a better job than I did. We've got some missiles, plasma cannons, some mine layers. The ship appears to want to be chased. Let's see what else we've got here. We got this thing, which is very heavily shielded, and those look like plasma mortars, so that thing is going to get up close and personal. But getting up close and personal and relying on shields, I feel like, isn't going to work out as well as maybe ideal. This thing, however, is one heavy hitter. You can see it's got the 6 large plasmas, it's got the rail guns. I think that's going to be a nightmare if it gets its hands on something. As you can see it tearing through GraffixJoka's little guys. The big thing with all the plasma cannons on it also appears to be a lot faster than some of the other competitors that GraffixJoka's been up against, and that looks like it's going to be a problem. Drill's taking a very solid point lead early on. I also forgot to mention, but the big thing with all the plasma cannons is also carrying some torpedo launchers. And torpedo launchers have proven their merit several times over in here. And yeah, Command Execute's fleet probably could have used a bit more armor, but at the same time, he probably could have used some more missiles too, honestly. The big problem with just tacking on more armor is if you still can't deliver damage to your opponent, you still aren't going to make a whole lot of progress. But fighting missiles with missiles isn't the worst idea. Although GraffixJoka takes round 1 after a very strong start from Dills. I feel like that's likely to work out well for GraffixJoka overall. And you can see that station shield going down very quickly. And there's a number of other shields lined up around the craft, but it's under fairly constant pressure, and so it's having a very difficult time recovering. Shields are very good against harassment, but as a primary defense source, generally don't hold up terribly well. And I think that's a bit of what we're seeing as the big ship goes down, and this round is all about GraffixJokas. Yeah, I've had the video quality scaling appear and disappear seemingly at random. I don't know what it is, but I don't think it's on my end. I haven't changed any settings. Last new fleet of the pool is Dinzoskythe's Meta 5000. Dinzoskythe is another first-time competitor, not just in NMSS tournaments, but first-time competitor in general. And you can see here he's going for a Sentinel melee rammer fleet. This guy has got a bunch of, what are those? Annihilators or plasma bolts? Those would have to be Annihilators. Interesting note though, he's using a lot of segments and not a lot of the armor plates, which means he's not going to be quite as durable as a Sentinel ship you might be expecting to see. But that said, that may be part of his design, is to accelerate toward the enemy, let him get broken and shoot melee fragments everywhere. This also, I feel like the core is a bit exposed here, but we'll see how it goes. I don't think this one's necessarily going to go in Dinzoskythe's favor. Joka's got harassment, he's got range, and appears to have mobility and speed as well. Dinzoskythe's fleet is holding on pretty well, but GraffixJoka's, we've seen him come back from a larger deficit already. Those Annihilators will do quite a bit of damage though if they get their hands on anything. Annihilators are pretty dangerous weapons overall. But an ever-growing lead in favor of GraffixJoka. We're beginning to see the effect of armored ships. Ships can only regenerate their armor and their components when they're not taking damage for a few seconds. I think it's something like 3 or 5 seconds or something like that, maybe longer. But being under constant harassment from the missiles like this means that these armored ships can't ever get a chance to regenerate. And as a result, despite having a bit of an early game point advantage, Dinzoskythe is falling behind because GraffixJoka's ships can retreat, repair themselves, and then re-engage, whereas Dinzoskythe is continually taking damage, and so his ships never really get a chance to recover. A very good run for GraffixJoka. And yeah, Terrans regenerate very quickly, but they still have to obey the rules. They can't regenerate when they're under fire. That's the main reason that shields are better against harassment, while armor is better against sustained fire. If you can only ever... If you do 100 damage per second, for example, you can eventually kill an armored ship of any size, provided your ship doesn't do anything silly. But against a shield, I don't think there's a single shield in the game that 100 damage per second would kill. Even though a Terran ship might be able to regenerate a 2000 armor block in like 2 seconds, it still wouldn't ever get a chance to, as long as you're continuing to do damage. Which is one of the reasons we do see things like you'll have a ship with a single missile, and that's to keep continual pressure on targets, and also sometimes it fools the AI into doing bad things. There's a lot of tricks that can be done in order to get the AI to behave correctly on your ships, but there's also a few tricks you can do to make the enemy AI also malfunction. Some really good malfunction choices include the use of missiles. It causes the enemy to spend more time dodging and less time attacking and lining up shots, or the use of trappers, because the enemy will focus on the core and ignore all of the guns on the arms of the trapper. There's a lot of things that can be done to fool ships, and the only way to really deal with it is to build up a library of archetypes and test against everything to make sure that you didn't accidentally leave a hole. But that said, that's GraffixJoka took every round except for his first one. But now we've got 005 up against Kamikaze. Not really certain how this one will end up going. Kamikaze Dalek, you can see his bigger ships are doing a very good job of staying oriented on target, which is going to make those proton beams actually fairly useful. They're a bit expensive for my taste, but if you can get your ships to behave well with them, they're actually not bad. They're pretty long-range beam weapons, which you don't see quite that many of, but 005 taking round 1 pretty confidently. And you can see there the effect of the mortars. Because of how his ship moves, his mortars do the drive-by effect very, very well. And as I was saying, he has more than the critical mass you need in order to punch giant holes in everything that they come across. We saw the mortar ship basically throw a volley and completely destroy one of the big ships from Kamikaze Dalek. I can't remember if I asked or mentioned it at all, but I'm pretty sure that 005 is not new to competitive play, just new to the NMSS tournaments. But here we have Keniteraa against 005. The station shield, I think, might resist the mortar volley a bit better than what we've seen out of some of the other fleets, but I do think that 005 is going to prove victorious in this matchup. His ships just offer too much mobility and too much damage, and because he has 2 ships, it's kind of a bit of a gamble. You can destroy 3/4 of one of his ships, but if you don't kill the core and the ship escapes, it can rebuild. But if he destroys, 2 ships on his way in, those ships cannot be rebuilt. Resources are off, so you can't recover new ship, or you can't recover any resources, you can't build any new ships or anything like that. And so what you started with is all you get. And because of that, as long as 005 ships stay alive, he essentially only gains value as the fight goes on, relatively speaking. Because as you can see, his ships are very good at delivering damage between the missiles and burst lasers on one ship and the plasma mortars and burst lasers on the other. He's actually really good at consistently taking apart small ships, and those mortar volleys are going to play havoc on anything that's unshielded. And yeah, I am liking a lot of the aesthetics I'm seeing, and I do appreciate fleets like LightningJC's, where if you've seen the fleet and you know who made it, you'll always recognize that fleet because the authors have a very distinctive style. Up next we have Command Execute up against wangbadan, and here we're going to really see the effect of those plasma mortar volleys on the big targets, I think, once some of the littler ones are dealt with. You can see those, they're basically very kitey juggernauts, but we should see a mortar volley any day now. There it is. You can see the giant chunk missing out of the side of the ship. Heavy mortar volleys are not to be underestimated, but that said, Command Execute's fleet is holding up rather well overall. He's losing his small ships pretty quickly, but I think his larger ones are giving up a pretty good fight. You can see 005 is actually missing about a quarter of each of his ships. But that said, they do seem to be content with staying outside of the dangerous range now. If that one ship just turned around. Ooh, and there it is. Command Execute tags one of the ships from 005 and brings it down in a blaze of glory. Yeah, it doesn't... I don't know if those plasmas are set to point defense or not, but they do seem to be struggling quite a bit. There is a bit of a flaw with the AI in that if a weapon is set to point defense, it will still fire at other ships, which is useful and something you can plan for and take advantage of. But it also means that the weapons, even if they are set to point defense, will sometimes focus on hostile ships instead of destroying incoming missiles, which is less than ideal. And it's one of the reasons you'll see ships with point defense weapons at a variety of ranges sometimes. But that said, only one ship left on each side and a point lead in favor of 005. I think this one is going to go in 005's favor. A good showing out of Command Execute, though. And is that little b kilobits per second, Duke? Or is that big B and a bit of, everything in lowercase letters? Because if you're getting 500 kilobits per second, you're never going to be able to watch the stream, unfortunately. The stream's running at 3500. And then let's see how round 2 goes. Round 1 was actually rather close. The point differential was pretty big, but because of how 005 ships are constructed, it only takes a few seconds for them to actually be destroyed if they get caught in close combat. And you can see both of the microchips are chasing the mortar ship right now. And the mortar ship isn't really that great outside of mortar range. It does have some missiles and it does have burst lasers, but neither one is a very efficient means of destroying large targets. Though that said, it did manage to take out one of the microchips, and with only the other microchip left, and 005 having both of his ships still on the board, I think this one's going to go in favor of 005. Also an excellent showing out of him. Right. So command execute is using point defense, but his point defense is in the form of those lasers on the little parapets, or whatever they are, kind of toward the exterior of the microchip. But because of their positioning, they're getting taken out pretty quickly, and they seem to be having a hard time actually figuring out what they should be shooting. But there we have it. 005 takes the match there. So now we have 005 up against Drills. Drills, we saw his big ship was struggling against GraffixJoka's fleet, mostly because GraffixJoka's fleet was super mobile. And 005's fleet is no less mobile, but I think if he gets his hands on those, on either one of these ships really, I think the big guy out of Drills is going to do a really good job. But that said, it does... This one could go either way within the span of about 2 seconds. And 005 takes round 1. For better or worse, these two ships from 005 are very much subject to AI behavior, which you'll find a lot of the veteran players prefer the consistency of very heavily armored craft, because it gives them the ability to minimize essentially random chance in combat results. Because if your ship can only brawl and the AI only tries to brawl with it, then it becomes a matter of building the most effective brawler. Whereas if you design a ship to kite and maneuver, the AI might make odd choices at pivotal moments and can cost you rounds. But so far 005 doing very well as he knocks out another round in his favor. And much like we saw with GraffixJoka, I feel as though this one is probably going to go in favor of 005. Those mortars against the unshielded and relatively small sentinels are going to be very effective, and the missile kiter is going to be able to do the same thing essentially that we saw with GraffixJoka's fleet. Yeah, as you can see, 005 is doing a pretty good job. The rammers from Dinzoskythe are almost exclusively forward thrusted, which is intended to force the AI to crash into the enemy. But the problem being that if they don't crash into the enemy, they have a very hard time recovering. You'll see his ship spending a lot of time spinning around, or like this guy was just not even looking in the right direction. That said, the mortar ship did manage to cut off about a third of his hull by crashing into one of the rammers. One of the other things to note is that even if a ship with melee spikes is killed, the melee spikes are still live, and there we saw one of the ships from 005 go careening into some of those melee spikes. So 005 down to only one of his 2 ships. And it being the plasma mortar means it's forced to engage at much closer ranges, where it's much more vulnerable to accidental death. And yeah, that is interesting. The first two into submissions that were from first-timers are performing extraordinarily well, as 005 takes round 1. Yeah, I could see the fiber optic cable thing. It is rather interesting. Another thing I don't believe I mentioned yet is that compared to the April tournament, Splinter has done quite a bit of redesigning on the graphics overhaul. So the game will probably look a bit different. I'm not sure exactly what he did, but I do think he did some changes to how thruster trails work, and I think he altered some of the projectile glow, which we might see with some of the other factions, or with some of the other fleets that were submitted. I think crystalline cannons can do it. They end up looking a good bit different. Overall, some very interesting changes, and I like that he's keeping the aesthetic of the game pretty fresh. And hello, Clem Hazard. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, the last pool is going to be pretty brutal, especially because Splinter conjured something from some fresh hell. It's some new kind of monster. And yes, thank you, Splinter, for the excellent graphics overhaul. I've been using it for long enough now that when I start the game up without Steam and don't have the mod enabled, everything just looks really weird now. Yeah, everyone's name color may appear different. One of the changes I did in this stream compared to previous ones is that I'm no longer using the pop-out Twitch chat in the browser. I'm actually using an application to manage Twitch chat separately, mostly because it's lighter weight than having a browser open. But I'm hoping that'll help keep everything running a bit more smoothly. Although I also have some long-term plans that are going to help that even more when they come to fruition. And 005 takes round 2 as well, which means we've already got our finalists for the champion pool out of the neophyte pool, with GraffixJoka and 005 having gotten 6 and 5 wins respectively, which no one else can top. But that said, let's see how everybody else handles each other. As you can see, Kamikaze Dalek's sniper ship's doing a very good job of keeping distance and oriented on their targets. This is actually very hard to do, to get this behavior to work correctly. It's one of the things that took me a very long time to get the hang of, and Kamikaze Dalek ships make it look so easy. I'm actually very fond of how they behave. A rough fight for LightningJC though. You can see all of the mines littering the field now as well, creating a veritable no man's land. But between the rails, the antimatters, and the proton beams, those snipers from Kamikaze Dalek are doing very good. Right. But the colors. Yeah, Floof I'm showing is purple. Yeah, I haven't messed with the colors too much. I don't even know if I can control it, but for the time being, I think it's alright. And I think this is just going to be a brief matter of time. You can see the mine layer ship does a very good job of throwing mines everywhere, but mine layers typically aren't that great at chasing targets, mostly because of exactly what we're seeing. LightningJC's ship is destroying the bulk of the mines with no problem, and the ones that it's not destroying still end up falling behind the ship. But that's a pretty insurmountable point gap. Clicking more colors kicked you out of the stream. They just got a browser refresh or something? And round one goes to Kamikaze Dalek. I do think these snipers are the linchpin of his fleet, though. If they manage to get run down, then I don't know that Kamikaze Dalek is going to be able to cover up whatever gap is created. But his snipers are very good, very well behaved. You can see the mine ship now getting buried in drones. Yeah, LightningJC's bigger ships do sport drone launchers, but the snipers out of Kamikaze Dalek don't really seem to care a whole lot. They'll fight all comers. And very good uptime on those proton beams too. That is remarkably difficult to do. And Kamikaze Dalek takes a win. So up next we have Kamikaze Dalek up against Command Execute. This I feel like Kamikaze Dalek will probably still have the advantage. Those burst laser ships are potentially very dangerous, especially at all the little things. But I feel like the microchips aren't going to have the speed to deal with the snipers out of Kamikaze Dalek. And those snipers will probably be able to whittle those microchips down eventually. But that said, one of the microchips did manage to get its hands on a sniper. It got distracted by something else and flanked. Hey, Exter. And Command Execute takes round one. So very clearly those microchips can get their hands on those snipers and do some work. But let's see if they can pull it off again. And one of the snipers actually down. I didn't see what killed it. I'm going to go ahead and guess it was one of the burst laser ships. The two snipers are a little too close together, and I think they're kind of pushing each other a bit, which is not going to improve their performance at all. That said, you can see them kind of whittling away, but the fact that the microchips are spinners is dramatically increasing their lifespan. But this microchip I don't think is very long for the world. Although caught up against a wall, they will not last long at all. And Command Execute takes the match. Well done. So now we have Kamikaze Dalek up against Drills. This big ship is definitely going to have what it takes to get into range with these snipers, but I don't know if it's going to behave correctly. If it gets too distracted, it's going to end up not being able to accomplish a whole lot like that. And it kind of just gave its side to the enemy and got shot. One of the dangers of fragile ships is that if they don't behave correctly, then they tend to disappear very, very quickly. If it had stayed focused on the two snipers, I feel like it might have been able to kill one, maybe both of them. But because it got distracted, it ended up just taking out a couple of components and then dying, which I'm sure is not what Drills was planning for at all. It can be hard to account for all of the things that the game can throw at you. And there goes round one in favor of Kamikaze Dialogue. Let's see if he can do it again. Ooh, torpedo volley taking out one of the snipers right off the bat. Less than ideal for Kamikaze Dialogue. And you can kind of get an idea of just how much they actually cost. I believe those snipers are the bulk, like between the three snipers, I think that's the bulk of the investment from Kamikaze Dialogue. But that said, even with one sniper down, the other two are doing a very good job. And those antimatters tearing small things apart, as they tend to do. I do like the antimatter cannon. It's just a bit expensive for most purposes. And this last sniper seems to have gone full superhero. And I believe the round is going to go in favor of Kamikaze Dialogue. Unless some sort of magic happens here. And there it is. Making a very strong first showing as well. And next up we've got Dinzoskythe up against Kamikaze Dialogue. These melee ships may be a bit of a problem. As you can see, the Annihilator volleys, they don't really care about the shields and any of the defenses that Kamikaze Dialogue is using. They just do too much damage, and you can see them punching through. All three of the snipers now down. Round one is almost certainly going in Dinzoskythe's favor, even with his ships being a bit confused on how to actually engage the enemy. But here you can see what I was talking about with the ships, kind of just spinning around trying to figure out how to engage the enemy a lot, rather than spending the bulk of their time actually engaging. And round one goes to Dinzo. And yeah, Floof, that is one of the bigger problems he has, is that you can kind of see it right now on the right. Some of his ships were stuck doing a pirouette instead of maneuvering to engage the enemy. I think with a bit of a different thruster arrangement, Dinzoskythe's fleet would be extremely dangerous. But that said, it does appear Dinzo is going to win this match. there it is. So up next we have LightningJC up against Command Execute. LightningJC has been having a bit of a rough tournament. His ships are very heavily reliant on shields, and they're pretty fragile once their shields are down. And as a result, the fleets he's been up against have been able to focus through the shields and take apart the big guys pretty quickly. And I don't remember exactly, but I believe the big guys are rather expensive, especially with those station shields. The two station shields themselves are $12.50 each. They are not a cheap investment. That said, the microchips are kind of being separated from everything else. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to fare up against the main chipset of LightningJC's fleet, but I do think at least in a straight up fight, the microchips probably have the advantage. Yeah, I'm not sure which one he has that has the two station shields. I do have his one ship. It's like a 230k vessel. That thing is gigantic. And here you can kind of see what the manipulators do as drones just kind of stop. LightningJC's big ships seem to be content to sit back and launch drones, but I don't think they realize they're down about 2,000 points. They need to score some rather than just sitting back and relaxing. And I don't know that they're going to wake up either. I think they're just going to keep doing this for a little while until they hit a wall or something. And there you can see how the fragility of the ships and relying on the station shields doesn't necessarily work out. You can also see the lasers from one of the microchips was too busy trying to focus on the ship rather than shooting the drones. It's a really common problem, and if you know what you're looking for, you'll see it all the time. And round 2 off to a very strong start for Command Execute. One of the big ships already dead, and the other one having lost its shields once or twice already. Or, well, having its shields go down, they weren't actually destroyed. These microchips from Command Execute are actually really solid ships. And I cannot remember what they were supposed to be called, but I like calling them microchips. I think that was a good name. There's going to be 4 subpools, with 2 advancing to the champion pool in each subpool. So the champion is going to be 8 instead of 6. This isn't a really good position for the microchip, but I do think... Oh yeah, the other microchip is still alive. I was going to say, I'm looking at how the scores were set out, or the scores were holding up. I was pretty sure that the microchip might even win, even if it was alone and didn't score any more points. There's just too much time left, or too little time left, and too big of a gap. But with the 2 microchips still up, I think they've got an even better chance of actually killing things. Especially when small ships go careening right into the microchips. If someone doesn't mind mentioning the 2 survivors, I can't really alt-tab or else it'll cause the screen to flicker and kind of make watching this segment of the video really annoying. And next up we have LightningJC up against Drills. I do think between these ships, I think the plasma cannon ship out of Drills has a good bit of an advantage over LightningJC's fleet. Between the torpedoes and the abundance of plasma cannons, he should be able to punch pretty big holes in things very quickly. And especially with it being left to the side to do what it actually with it being left to the side to actually do what it wants. And yes, winner. It's 2 from each subpool, which is going to give us a champion pool of 8 rather than the usual 6. That said, though, LightningJC is not really out of this yet. The big guy is getting harassed down, or the big guy from Drills is getting harassed down. He's completely surrounded. His shields you can see popping up and down. Though that said, almost all of Lightning's fleet's been destroyed at this point. Really just a matter of holding on. Or killing everything, I suppose. Killing everything could work too. Appreciate it, Spinner. And round 2, you can see Drills is off to an even stronger start, with half of Lightning's fleet gone within the first 20 seconds. It's not looking great for LightningJC in here. Yeah, the neophyte pool is... I have to resist the urge of calling it a kiddie pool, because the pun is just so strong. But a win for Drills, making an excellent showing. And next up we have Dinzoskythe up against LightningJC. And you can see the melee ships cleaving through both of LightningJC's larger ships, which is not a great position for LightningJC's fleet to find itself in. And yeah, there are a lot of Terran submissions, but there kind of have always been a lot of Terrans. Yeah, kiddie pool sounds dangerous. It, you know, some kiddies have claws. An important thing to keep in mind. And yeah, the Terrans have always been pretty popular. It's the first faction you unlock. It's kind of... As a faction, it's pretty well balanced. There's a lot of variety in the weapons, armor, shapes, things like that. And a lot of their weapons are some of their weapons are the best in class sort of weapon, where there's very few answers across the board that are as good. Especially things like the burst laser is one of the best point defense in the game. The antimatter cannon, the torpedo, they're all some of the better weapons that you can get your hands on. Yeah, the shape of crystalline and makes them a pretty difficult faction to deal with. The Penrose tile set is a bit frustrating if you don't want to actually take a lot of time to work your head around it. And Dinzoskythe taking round 1 rather effectively, but as mentioned before, his ships spend a lot of time driving in circles trying to figure out how to face the target rather than engaging the target. A good showing though, just some relatively minor adjustments needed. And moving in around 2, you can see basically the same thing happening. The big ships don't have the mobility to avoid the rushers, and as a result, melee spikes doing their what feels like infinite DPS to the big ships is taking them off the field almost immediately. And with that, a very large portion of LightningJC's hitting power is getting swept away. And I think we're going to see about what we saw last time, where the bulk of the clock is just going to run out while we wait for the odd ship to get killed here and there. But I think we can say that Dinzoskythe has already won this match. And there it is, Dinzoskythe wins the match. So now we have Command Execute up against Drills. I feel like the microchips are going to have a pretty big advantage over the plasma ship out of drills. You can see the giant chunk taken away by the mortars, or by the torpedoes, but after that you can see there's not a whole lot left from the plasma ship, at least relatively speaking. But as long as the microchip keeps getting distracted, it's not going to make a whole lot of progress. You can also see on the left side the other microchip managed to stop some torpedoes that would have otherwise connected. Doing a pretty good job. That one microchip is really banged up though relief is on its way, and I think it might actually still end up killing the plasma ship, left to its own devices. Command Execute's fleet making another very strong showing. As was said a few times, a lot of excellent submissions in the neophyte pool. But round 1 is all but won by Command Execute. Just waiting on the clock to tick down. And now moving in round 2. It was a very confident round 1. And there you can see the plasma ship going down. I think the plasma ship from drills is actually worth half of its fleet budget, which is causing big problems when it gets caught out like that. One of the big problems with investing very heavily in a fragile ship is that if it does get caught out, then you basically just threw away a ton of budget. Yeah, I know a big word. I'll say a big word every once in a while. How does that make you feel? And next up we have Command Execute up against Dinzoskythe. I feel like Command Execute's going to do pretty well here too. Dinzoskythe's ships spend a lot of time spinning in circles, and those torpedoes and mortars are going to pay dividends. Not to mention those heavily armored ships. The actual functional penetration of a melee ship depends pretty heavily on relative mass and velocity. Although that said, the Annihilators did work on the one microchip, but the Dinzoskythe has taken some really heavy losses so far. I don't know that Dinzoskythe is going to be able to kill the other microchip though. His fleet is too spread out, and they're hemorrhaging members rather quickly, which is going to make it pretty easy for the microchip to piece things apart one at a time. And you can see some of the torpedo ships are still up, floating around, shooting torpedoes at things. Torpedoes are probably one of the most overall effective weapons in the game. I think they're one of the bigger reasons we see a lot of Terran submissions, especially from the veterans. For their cost, you get a lot of bang for the buck. And here's one of the problems with not having any reverse thrusters. This is all this ship can do. And when it gets to the corner here, I think it's just going to kind of be stuck until this happens. And Command Execute takes the match. Very solid round one from Command Execute, and as long as those two microchips stay together, I think they're going to be able to clean the field pretty quickly. As you can see them just mowing through ships. The Sentinel cannons, I often harp on about how the Sentinel cannons are a lot better than most people think. The Annihilators especially have a very large splash range. On paper, they don't seem like they're as good as their equivalent weight worth of plasma bolts, but the splash range makes them very good against armored targets. And that said, though, one microchip just got taken down, drilled through by a couple of Dinzoskythe ships. The scoreboard very close this round. But I do think Command Execute probably still has the advantage. And with the ship count dwindling and time running out, here we go. Command Execute wins the match. So last up for the Neophyte pool, we have Drills up against Dinzoskythe. This one's kind of a hard one to read. Well, that said though, Drill's big ship certainly has what it takes to do a lot of damage, but there we saw the AI kind of flub a bit and get itself murdered pretty quickly, which is the largest portion of Drill's damage output. And with a huge point lead like that, I think Dinzoskythe will probably end up just riding out that point lead for the rest of the match. I don't know that either team is going to finish killing the other yet, but it definitely looks like Dinzoskythe is taking round one. And yeah, picture books are hard to read, because, you know, a picture's like 1,000 words, so even if you read like 100 words per minute, it takes a long time. And yeah, a multiplayer reassembly, like legit synchronous multiplayer reassembly, would be neat, but it would be a full engine rewrite, and since this game is like 95% engine, it's just not gonna happen. Yeah, I don't think synchronous multiplayer is ever going to be a thing, at least not in Reassembly. Arthur has said he's working on something else, though to be honest, I'd be surprised if that supported direct multiplayer too. It might support something like tournament mode in this, but the only thing we know about it is that Arthur's working on something. We have no other information at all. And there it is, Dinzoskythe wins the match. Well played everybody, and we will be seeing 005 and GraffixJoka in the champion pool. Hope to see you there.